In just 47 seconds, $127 billion in frozen trade subsidies became the diplomatic weapon that could shatter the fragile economic corridor between Brussels and Beijing. Ursula von der Leyen didn't wait for the translators to finish. She placed the document marked Article 207, Emergency Commercial Measures, directly on the podium and began speaking with the precision of someone who knew every decimal point carried geopolitical weight. The cameras zoomed in. The European Parliament held its breath. What did the Commission President reveal that made China's Ministry of Commerce issue its first official warning in 6 years? I'm standing in the Strasbourg chamber, where the air still carries the tension of what just unfolded. This isn't a routine trade dispute. This is the moment Brussels decided to call Beijing's bluff on industrial subsidies, and the response from the East has been swift, calculated, and deeply unsettling. We're witnessing the opening moves of an economic chess game where the stakes are measured not in millions, but in the structural integrity of global supply chains. The document von der Leyen presented was leaked to me by a source inside the Directorate General for Trade just 90 minutes before this session began. It's a 247-page investigative report titled Competitive Distortions in the Electric Vehicle Sector, China Analysis 2025-2026. The numbers are devastating. According to the Commission's internal audit, Chinese EV manufacturers received $89.4 billion in direct state subsidies between January 2023 and December 2025. That's not an estimate. That's a forensic accounting trail built from customs data, corporate filings, and intercepted communications between provincial governors and Beijing's central planning committees. Von der Leyen's voice was steady, almost clinical, as she read from page 34. The evidence demonstrates systematic market manipulation through below-cost financing, preferential land allocation valued at $12.7 billion, and energy subsidies totaling $23.1 billion annually. She paused. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then she delivered the hammer blow. Effective immediately, the European Union is imposing compensatory tariffs ranging from 17% to 38% on all Chinese electric vehicles entering the single market. The reaction was instant and fractured. The European People's Party erupted in applause. The Greens sat frozen, caught between their climate commitments and their trade principles. But it was the Chinese delegation seated in the diplomatic gallery that told the real story. Ambassador Li Feng didn't move. His expression remained neutral, almost bored, but his chief economic advisor, Zhang Wei, was frantically typing on his phone. Within 4 minutes, Beijing time 1642, the Ministry of Commerce released a statement that media outlets are still struggling to fully decode. The Chinese response was a masterclass in strategic ambiguity wrapped in barely concealed threat. The People's Republic of China expresses deep concern regarding unilateral protectionist measures that contradict WTO principles and damage mutual economic cooperation built over decades of partnership. China reserves the right to implement corresponding countermeasures to protect its legitimate commercial interests and the stability of global industrial chains. That phrase, corresponding countermeasures, is diplomat speak for economic warfare. My sources in Beijing, officials who spoke on condition of absolute anonymity, confirmed that 3 specific retaliation scenarios are already being wargamed in the State Council. Scenario 1 targets European luxury goods. France's cognac industry, worth $4.2 billion annually to China, could face sudden quality inspections that effectively halt imports. Already, Chinese customs authorities in Shanghai have begun enhanced screening procedures on French agricultural products. Scenario 2 involves rare earth elements. China controls 87% of global production of minerals essential for European tech manufacturing, neodymium for electric motors, dysprosium for wind turbines, europium for LED displays. A simple export licensing delay could cripple German automotive plants within 60 days. Siemens, Bosch, and Continental operate on just-in-time supply chains with less than 45 days of rare earth inventory. But scenario 3 is the nuclear option. China holds $340 billion in European sovereign debt. The threat isn't to dump it all at once, that would crater their own holdings. The threat is selective strategic divestment targeting bonds of countries most vulnerable to yield spikes. Italy, with its $2.8 trillion debt burden and debt-to-GDP ratio at 142%, could see borrowing costs spike by 200 basis points if Beijing moves just 8% of its holdings. That would trigger a sovereign debt crisis that would make 2011 look like a dress rehearsal. The timeline of how we reach this breaking point is critical. It began on October 3, 2025, when a German trade delegation visiting Shenzhen discovered something that wasn't supposed to be visible to foreign eyes. At the Shenzhen Advanced Manufacturing Zone, they photographed a subsidiary of BYD receiving a direct wire transfer of $847 million, approximately $108 million from the Guangdong Provincial Development Fund. The transaction code indicated New Energy Vehicle Strategic Support, non-repayable. That single receipt became Exhibit A in the Commission's subsidy investigation. Von der Leyen's team spent 4 months building an airtight legal case. They cross-referenced satellite imagery of factory expansions with provincial budget documents leaked by Hong Kong-based researchers. They analyzed the pricing strategies of Chinese EV makers in the European market. The data revealed vehicles being sold at prices 32% below production cost, a textbook definition of dumping enabled only by state financial backing that no private competitor could match. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when Volkswagen's CEO Oliver Blume testified before a closed-door session of the European Parliament's Committee on International Trade. I obtained partial transcripts. Blume stated, and I quote, "We are competing against an entire nation-state apparatus, not a corporation. Our R&D budget for 2025 is $18 billion. BYD received more than that in a single fiscal quarter from entities that answer directly to the Central Committee." His testimony was the political ammunition von der Leyen needed to move from investigation to action. But here's where the story becomes truly dangerous. This isn't just about cars. The electric vehicle sector is the visible battlefield, but the real war is about technological supremacy in the industries that will define the next 30 years. Battery technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing. These are the domains where China and Europe are locked in a zero-sum competition for dominance. Von der Leyen's tariff announcement is essentially a declaration that Brussels will no longer tolerate state-backed industrial policy masquerading as free market competition. China's cautious reaction, the carefully worded statement, the absence of immediate retaliatory tariffs, reveals something crucial. Beijing is calculating. They're running the numbers on what a full trade war with the EU would actually cost. The European Union is China's second-largest trading partner, worth $739 billion in bilateral trade in 2025. That's not a relationship you incinerate over a tariff dispute, even a symbolically significant one. Yet caution doesn't mean capitulation. My contacts in the European External Action Service report that behind-the-scenes negotiations have been taking place through back-channel diplomatic networks. A senior Chinese trade official reportedly told his European counterpart, "You are forcing us to choose between economic logic and political face. That is a choice no government makes lightly, especially not ours." The subtext was clear. If Beijing backs down publicly, it signals weakness to domestic audiences and emboldens other trading partners to impose similar measures. The markets are already pricing in the conflict. The Euro Stoxx 50 dropped 2.3% within an hour of von der Leyen's announcement. Chinese stock exchanges saw EV manufacturers lose $47 billion in market capitalization in a single trading session. BYD's shares fell 8.4% in Hong Kong trading. NIO plummeted 11.2%. These aren't minor corrections. These are panic sell-offs driven by institutional investors who understand that access to the European market represents 23% of projected revenue growth for Chinese EV makers through 2028. But the real economic turbulence is happening in the derivatives markets, where investors are hedging against supply chain disruptions with a ferocity that suggests they expect this standoff to escalate significantly. Credit default swaps on European automotive debt have spiked by 34 basis points. Container rates from Shanghai to Rotterdam have already increased by 12% as logistics companies factor in potential tariff complications. Major European ports are bracing for a potential 18 to 22% reduction in Chinese cargo volumes, threatening $14 billion in lost port revenues and 67,000 jobs in the maritime logistics sector alone. Von der Leyen's gamble is that Europe can endure short-term economic pain for long-term strategic gain. She's betting that by drawing a hard line now, she can force China to either reform its subsidy practices or accept permanent exclusion from the world's largest consumer market. But that bet assumes European unity, and unity is the one commodity Brussels can never take for granted. Hungary's Viktor Orbán has already called the tariffs economic self-harm. Germany's industrial lobby is privately terrified that China will retaliate against their automotive exports, which represent $34 billion in annual revenue from the Chinese market alone. The next 30 days will determine whether this becomes a manageable trade dispute or a rupture that reshapes global commerce. China has requested formal consultations under WTO dispute mechanisms, a procedural move that buys time while they assess their options. European diplomats are flying to Beijing for what are being described as exploratory talks, which is code for damage control before the situation spirals into mutual economic destruction. I've covered trade wars, tariff battles, and subsidy disputes for 15 years. This feels different. The rhetoric is sharper. The financial stakes are exponentially higher. And most critically, both sides have dug into positions that make backing down politically treacherous. Von der Leyen has framed this as defending European jobs and industrial capacity. Xi Jinping's government has framed European tariffs as Western protectionism designed to contain China's rise. When national pride becomes entangled with economic policy, rational compromise becomes nearly impossible. We're watching two of the world's largest economic blocs locked in a confrontation where neither can afford to lose face, yet neither can afford a full economic divorce. The billion-dollar question isn't just about money, it's about whether the institutions of global trade, built over 75 years of multilateral cooperation, can survive an era where economic policy has become inseparable from geopolitical strategy. Beijing is reacting cautiously because they understand what Brussels is just beginning to grasp. This isn't a negotiation that ends with a compromise tariff rate. This is the beginning of a long, grinding contest to determine whose economic model,